Hello and welcome back to the Periphery. Tonight I'm super excited to host the director of the Center for AI and Digital Policy, Merve Hickok, who is perhaps, actually literally one of the top 100 AI policy and influential leaders in the world. She is at the forefront of the Council of Europe's legislation, and she just recently testified last month before Congress on all things AI, and which is really particularly exciting because the Biden administration just released a call for comments for how and what the heck should we do with AI, which I think your testimony pretty much sets up the conversation pretty well. Marva, are we ready for a tech revolution?
Thanks, Afi, and thanks for having me, the whole team. And I'm glad that we're finally getting to do this because the time of the testimony was when we had initially discussed to have this conversation. So I was telling Afi that I had a good excuse. Uh, you know, we are not ready. I think there's a lot happening in US and globally, which is very positive. We are in a very different landscape and a very positive landscape in terms of AI policy here in US right now, as opposed to last year or 2 years before. Now there are more mainstream conversations on AI. Policymakers are looking to are also interested to hear more about it, but also do something about it. And I think there's actually bipartisan agreement on having to, the need to do something about it and regulate AI and put safeguards in place. I think many policymakers and decision makers now understand the implications of AI, not only on the main risks, but actual implications on human rights and rule of law and democratic values in our society at large.
So that's a really good start. Before we get too deep, I kind of want to hear about your path. You said you were a political science international relations major. So how were you called into these issues? When did you realize this was going to be a really big, have a ton of broad revolutionary implications, and how did you get to here for our listeners that are curious about AI or just curious about building a career?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was not a straight line. I had many zigzags throughout my career. As you mentioned, international relations and political science major, but I didn't get the chance to practice my major coming out of college. So
You're kind of practicing it now. You're practicing it now.
well, I kind of ate my words because I said I would never work for a bank or financial institution. And of course, my first job was with a German bank. The second job was Merrill Lynch. Third job, as the acquisition happened with Bank of America Merrill Lynch.
It's quite relatable for I think every law student ever who's like, yeah, I'm definitely never gonna work at a big law firm, and then 20 minutes later, they're like, okay, so I'm working at two big law firms this summer.
Exactly. Never say never. But actually, that worked out. I mean, although it wasn't like I said, a linear or intended, uh, career progress. One of my last jobs in Bank of America Merrill Lynch was I was in charge of diversity recruitment, and very separate from that, because that's where we were with headcounts and FTEs, etc. At the time. I was also in charge of the bank's graduate recruitment technologies around the world. So Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and pretty much anything outside of United States. I was in charge of those technologies. So at one hand, I was talking to all the graduates coming out of colleges, applying for internships, full-time jobs. I'm trying to create partnerships, asking them what do they think about investment banking, like what kind of barriers they had in front of them in terms of getting into the field and industry, and also trying to improve our technologies. And then there was this clashing point, and which was an aha moment for me, because we were trying to streamline things, we're trying to improve things, expand it to more people, democratize the applications. But the students were telling me that, hey, I don't have broadband access at home. I don't have a quiet space to do um, the video interview that you asked me to do. I don't have, I don't have this. I don't have this. Like this is putting, or filtered out by the system and the systems that these big technology companies and banks are using. And I don't know why. I don't know how to deal with this. I don't even know how to prepare for this. So that was my aha moment, and that was more than a decade ago. So I started digging. I'm an incredibly curious person by nature. So I started digging, went down a rabbit hole, as I say, and got out of the rabbit hole 3 years later, kind of deciding that I would leave corporate world and focus on AI ethics, and social justice and equity, and what AI means in that world. One thing led to another, so I founded AIethicist.org, which is my platform. And then I want to say 3 years ago, Mark Rosenberg, who's like one of the most amazing people in this and in the AI policy world, he reached out to me, and he already had a small team of people who were already pretty experts in the field, saying we're putting this project together. Are you interested? And then the rest is history. I'm now the research director and president of the center, and enjoying every moment. And I can talk
So
about the center separately later.
yeah, so you kind of hinted at it with your talk about not having broadband access, not having video conferencing. But why is your answer we're not ready, and what can we do to start getting ready as AI is just everywhere, every headline, every 2 seconds is something AI related.
Absolutely. So one thing, we definitely have certain agencies and regulations and controls in place, with FTC, EUC, FCC, FDA, etc. But these agencies uh, are not currently in a place, or yet in a place, to uh, having experimented with some of the AI systems. They're doing, a lot of them are putting forward a great policy work and some principles, some guidance, etc. But I don't think we have experimented in terms of investigations, actual investigations, and policy making by those agencies yet. We are So we need to make better use of the existing regulations and existing agencies to start with, and that we are at the very beginning of that role. In terms of literacy, AI literacy, and what AI systems mean for individuals, groups in the society at large, and countries, and that goes from anything from national security to democratic values and rule of law within a country. We don't have that digital literacy yet. I think there's still a lot of gap between those who are involved in these conversations, whether developers or policymakers or AI, researchers, etc., who are working on this around the clock, and then majority of the society and organizations who are more subject to these systems without understanding the implications. And then the third piece is the research capacities and capabilities are still concentrated in the hands of very few. That's very few campuses and very few technology companies. So if we're going to benefit from these systems in a way that we hope to, and if we're going to improve them for the future that we want, we need to more access to those research capacities, and more discussion around what our future looks like with AI systems.
Merve, on that note, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is because the sort of research and development of AI, as you said, is concentrated in so few hands, especially when it comes to private technology companies, there's almost this incentive to not share how they're developing these technologies, to develop the best product and to be competitive within a specific market space. And in terms of addressing sort of the accessibility to AI, do you think there's a route to sort of making AI more accessible despite the opposing interests of these private companies?
There's a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of gatekeeping. for different reasons. So that's gatekeeping for power, gatekeeping for commercial reasons, political power, as well as commercial reasons. And you see, as you mentioned, these companies becoming less and less transparent in what they do. Not that they were transparent to start with, but it's becoming more opaque. And there's a lot of, like I said, political power and money at the end of it. So I always say, the old adage, like follow the money. If you start following the money instead of the hype, you see like what's happening, where the money is going, and who's actually benefiting from all the current discourse, as well as the research. One thing that's happening with technology companies having these resources, and it's really only a handful, like I said, companies and campuses, is they get to decide what to focus on. They ask the research questions, right? So this is where we're going to put all the compute resource, data set resources, and the talents behind it, and we're going to fund these questions because we can turn that around and turn that into products. They're not necessarily the questions that the society might be interested in improving, for example, climate or traffic or other constructions or disaster response, etc. You name it. So society might actually have other questions that they want answers and solutions for before focusing on products. Similarly, they might not be necessarily the questions that academic researchers want to ask, but without the funds, without access to the data sets, without access to some of the compute power, you're not going to be able to ask those questions. So we see two things happening between campuses and tech companies as well. One is you're kind of shaping your research questions according to what these companies are interested in. So kind of banding your questions. The second piece is, and banding in a sense that that you might propose, hey, I'm interested in this. Would you fund my project? And then you're like, or would you provide me the compute power? And they're like, no, but we would if you were interested in doing this. So it changes the structure, right? So you make a trade-off. The second thing is you're seeing around the world, this is not an American phenomena, a lot of named PhD and postdoc positions. So the companies are already funding, new PhDs, new doctors coming out, and postdoc fellows. So even if you're sitting in an academic institution, you're already contributing towards the products. And many people at some point decide that it's more beneficial to for their personal gain, like no judgment, to join the companies rather than stay in academia and do the things that they wanted to do coming into PhD programs in the first place. So there are a lot of issues that concern me with the gatekeeping and the current access to research and access to data sets and compute.
I want to take a little bit of a step back. I think this conversation about sort of how corporate interests have invaded the field of AI is really interesting. But I want to kind of get a sense of where we are now and kind of where we're going. Sort of my understanding is there's been sort of limited AI integration, excuse me, for a while. You gave the example of computer models that sift through resumes in the context of investment banks. And I think those things have been around for a while and seem relatively harmless. But it seems like we're maybe at an inflection point, or that there's sort of a groundswell happening in terms of AI research and development. And I'm curious about where we are in terms of integration today and kind of what the fear is or what the worst case scenario is, or best case scenario kind of going into the future, and what really we're talking about regulating here.
Great question, Evan. And I would say we're at a weird point or a change point because some of these systems are now more accessible / unleashed onto the mainstream public. So whereas up until very recently, a lot of these AI systems, you were either using it as a company for your purposes, whether it was like for different business purposes, or for like resume sifters, or credit models, insurance models, etc. But it was the companies that were making those choices, and the individuals were the targets of the systems. They were not knowingly, intentionally interacting with this, engaging with these systems. So it was more like imposed upon them, either because they were carrying their phone or laptops, or had AI-powered appliances in their houses, you name it. They were subject to surveillance, or a company was making a decision to use the systems. So there is this like you're using it for business purpose, or you're a subject or target of the system. Especially with generative systems, that has changed, because anyone can now like go in and play around with generative videos, images, text, you name it, and it's fun. And there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening with it. I see a lot of benefits to it. It's like not against the technology itself.
It's helped me write quite a handful of cover letters.
Yeah, and there's going to be great things coming out of it. However, when you unleash these technologies on the mainstream without safeguards, you're also bringing in a lot of risks to it. So, for example, we recently submitted an official complaint to Federal Trade Commission on OpenAI and GPT products. If you look at the company's website, for example, you see between the security cards, technical reports, and their policies listed on the website, there's a whole host of risks that they envisage will the system will bring. And then we asked the question, okay, what are you doing about it? There isn't really much transparency to Adam's earlier question about the companies becoming more opaque. There is no disclosures or documentation publicly available on their data sets. Nothing on the model decisions or the process. There's some very high level, description of the some of the red teaming and security process that they went through, but not in detail. And so what's happening right now is like, okay, I got this product, everyone can use it. I'm allowing everyone to use it. The subscriptions will jump from 0 to 100 million in a matter of days. So it's great engagement, great interest. And then I'm listing all these risks and harms. I don't have to do anything further. I listed it, so I don't have to do anything further about it. So regulation needs to put burden on the companies and obligations on these companies to mitigate those risks, and be responsible, be accountable for the harms that they're creating, for possible downstream implications and human rights implications of this. It's not that these issues came up with generative AI. We've been talking about human rights implications of AI systems across different domains, from healthcare to criminal justice to border management to recruitment to insurance to credit, etc. for years. But I think when people start interacting with the system themselves, it creates a different approach and engagement.
Yeah, and bouncing off this whole idea of accountability and obligations of these companies, especially with regards to human rights. I know that you noted when you testified before Congress that AI determines people's opportunities in life, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and talk about your solutions for that.
Thank you for the question, Evel. As I was closing the previous question, we've been talking about what AI systems, when designed and deployed without accountability, can mean in terms of access to resources and opportunities. And what we mean by that is AI systems are already used to assess people's trustworthiness, creditworthiness, um, employability, you name it. Starting from school, starting from high school, middle school, you are being subject to AI systems, all the way, down to your elderly years and anything in between. It's almost becoming like a cradle to grave systems. So they're used to make decisions about when you apply to jobs, when you're applying for insurance, whether you should be insured or not, and under what conditions. When you apply for a loan or a mortgage, whether you should be approved for that credit and under what conditions. You might be rejected. You might be accepted at a lot higher rates than others. When you're trying to sell your, for example, your house or your property, your house might be devalued for less, and you might be losing on investments as well. Healthcare, might there are AI systems making decisions about not only your health, but your whether you should be prioritized in the health system. We've seen AI systems who have prioritized Black patients over white patients, although they had the same disease conditions or health conditions, just because of their race diversity prioritization, and that has serious implications, right? We see AI systems used in criminal justice, whether that's used for recidivism or bail decisions or prison decisions, facial surveillance or biometric surveillance to decide whether you committed a crime or not. We see them to make decisions on asylum seekers and refugees. So your ability to go through life with dignity, your ability to exercise your human rights, your ability to access resources such as government benefits, etc., or your ability to access opportunities such as credit, jobs, loans, insurance, etc. These are all tied together, and whether we know it or not, in each of these domains and more, when you apply to colleges and schools, there is AI systems making decisions about your, whether to admit you to a certain college or not, or your financial, student loan decisions, etc. So all of those decisions also accumulate, right? In and of themselves, they have huge implications. But then they also start accumulating because you've been disadvantaged from one system to another. So we also need to think about, systemic risks and accumulation over time as well.
On that, on that, you said, I think with data, for example, we saw that, data collection was happening for some time before people started to really see it as problematic from a consumer and public perspective. In the same way, I feel like these issues around AI, they're really, really salient, as you mentioned, for people's lives. And yet, I think it's still not necessarily, I think for most consumers, the big button issue that they have in the back of their head. I think it's becoming that now that, we have ChatGPT and more, media coverage of this issue. But What do you feel might make this issue more salient for consumers in being able to identify the role that AI is playing in their lives as it happens and kind of attribute those harms that they're experiencing to AI, so that it can, I don't know, be more actionable?
Another great question, Silva. One is definitely regulation, and whether that is consumer regulation plus regulations, catching up, civil rights being applied to these domains, our civil right protections being applied to these domains. We cannot have the burden or the onus of countering the systems or countering the harms to individuals. There needs to be systemic protections, and the burden should be on the companies. So individuals have rights, and the companies and the corporations and the government have obligations to protect those rights. So how do we shape the regulation to make sure that that burden sits with the companies? So one, they're only collecting data or making decisions with a legal basis, and not like a dragnet of data collection and applications. Second, the humans have a right to, not to be subjected to that system. Third, having disclosures and transparency about how the systems work and when they are being applied. A lot of the times, to your question, we don't even know that we're subject to these systems. I live and breathe AI and AI policy. I could not tell you the full list of AI systems that are making decisions about me on a 24/7 basis, or given one 24-hour cycle. So more disclosure about this stuff, and limited applications, limited contexts, and again, burden on the companies, so they cannot collect all the data and apply it as they wish, or use the data collected in one context and repurpose it to another AI system or another context. So we see those as well. But also, the second part is one piece is regulation. The second piece is literacy. We have a lot to do on general digital literacy, and starting from very early ages, 3-4 years old, you start engaging with phones and tablets and games and different platforms. Without understanding what that means for your future life, and us without having any controls over what that means for the children's lives, etc. And what I'm trying to say is the impact starts at very early age. So can we start this literacy programs or focus on digital literacy at an early age as well, and build up on that? Because at the end of the day, it's not only your personal impact on your personal life, it's on society with disinformation and misinformation and general democratic practice of democratic values and democratic institutions as well. So I would say more resources, more focus on increasing that literacy across society.
Merve, if I may, is hammering down on your point on the need for regulation, and we obviously want to be conscious of your time. Something though I think we're all really curious about, especially as law students, is you've mentioned that different government agencies are putting forth a greater effort towards AI regulation. They're taking comments. They're putting forth. They're thinking about these different issues. But as your testimony also illustrates, Congress is sort of the other side of this coin. And in terms of the actual mechanisms to further, I guess, your goal of more regulation, I mean, what is the relationship now between Congress and these different government agencies on AI, especially when, let's be candid, we're dealing with a court that is willing to defer major questions. It seems to be a really interesting time in our country's history to be confronting such a large question.
It is, and I think it's not for me at least, it's not a one or either or question. There needs to be, different angles and different policies and practices in this field. So one thing I would say is from the Congress side, we definitely need a bipartisan regulation, both on privacy, federal privacy, as well as AI systems, regulating AI systems in a meaningful way. I'm not asking for more regulation just for the sake of more regulation, but effective, meaningful regulation that will protect our civil rights, human rights, and rule of law as both private and government, both public and private actors deploy these systems. I think we also need to remember that governments can become the biggest AI actors because they have monopoly over certain services. They have monopoly over power in certain domains. So while regulating private companies, we shouldn't lose sight of how government is using AI systems either, right? In criminal justice, in policing, in courts, in border management, you name it. So we need commitment for Congress to, in a bipartisan way, to regulate this effectively and meaningfully, one. Second, the agencies, in the absence of any additional regulation, the agencies are creating this, like I mentioned, these guidelines and initiatives and trying to use their existing powers, enforcement and investigation powers, to kind of apply what is already there to this new reality. So we're going to see more as those enforcement and regulations enhance, or we see more of them. You're going to see those becoming cases, or those becoming like models of what companies or governments should do, could do, etc. So there's going to be a second parallel track for regulations. And then eventually there's going to be case law. We're going to see more and more courts picking up, whether it's tenant screening algorithms or home evaluations or recruitment or wrongful arrest, etc. There's going to be, across all of these domains, there's going to be more case law coming up. And I think the question about literacy there is the lawyer workforce, like legal workforce, whether it's lawyers, prosecutors, or judges, are they ready to deal with these cases as well? And I'll turn the question on you, but
Sure.
there isn't really one track. Okay, Congress needs to regulate, and everyone can sit back and watch until they do. There needs to be multiple track, multi-pronged approaches to this, while we're also having standards, civil society advocacy, and other stuff building up. So we need to look at the whole, all the tools that we might want in our toolkit.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in direct response to that, I would agree with you that we have the toolkit of enacting laws and agencies developing further expertise in making rules. I think the two things that really worry me, and one, I'm beating a dead horse here, is obviously the continued deteriorating polarization in the country. And I do think that we're at a time where so many people are contemplating the fears of AI that we might see more unity than not. But I also, and it's no secret, I'm afraid of sort of the consequences of AI. I know big law firms are using it now. Our jobs are certainly at play. I can see the other argument that despite all of the fears, there's an advantage to AI being developed by private companies in the United States. And I think that's where the agencies may have the biggest problems, where they're trying to impose rules that safeguard society, But we will also have to enact laws that, while protecting civilians, also allow for the advantages and expansiveness of this technology within the United States, especially at a time when, let's not kid ourselves, the issues of global politics are real. And I think that's something that we're also confronting right now, with other actors trying to develop the technology.
It is real. I would just caution against current AI race, AI war, AI race rhetoric on that. But I'm totally with you that you want private actors, and you want big and small and medium-sized private actors to be in the space, collectively benefit from resources, challenging each other for better. Regulations for me provide you with the framework of, okay, don't step beyond these, because these are where you're going to hurt someone, where you're going to undermine someone's human rights or rule of law, etc. So just creating the very wide frameworks and safeguards, and then all the private public actors can do whatever they want in the middle, as long as they respect those. You cannot create pseudoscientific systems like predictive policing and with a private company, and then the government, as the police department, comes and deploys that in a jurisdiction, right?
Right.
Or you cannot use to indiscriminately reject asylum seekers or refugees because AI system said so. There needs to be, those guidelines where you have the red lines. Don't step beyond these, because then there are serious implications on human life, human dignity, and human rights. Whatever you do inside, that's why we're talking about innovation, right? So I'm totally with you on that. We just need to make sure that some of these framing of issues and some of the dichotomies are correct, and not like feeding into certain hype.
Thank you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I was thinking, in law we talk a lot about rules versus standards, and I think with a technology, especially with the innovation interest and with the uncertainty about all the different ways that AI could be used, I think legislators, at least in the EU, have focused more on standards of at this certain risk level, we think that companies should be self-regulating, and then we'll come in and see if you're self-regulating well enough. But do you think that a standards approach gives the appropriate level of I guess flexibility for companies, or do you think that a rules-based approach might, I don't know, what do you feel will be more effective at setting those red lines of do not cross that you kind of alluded to in your previous statement?
I think standards, and if you're talking about EU AI Act, specifically, the whole self-assessment, conformity assessment gives a lot of space for companies to, to assess themselves, to be in conformity with the regulation, to hold themselves accountable. I think discussing a risk-based approach versus a rights-based approach is a whole different conversation. But I understand, my preference will be on a rights-based approach. These are the human rights we need to respect. How do we incorporate that into design, development, deployment, and use of these systems? What are the rights of the users that we need to respect, and then work that back into the operations and into the product, versus risk-based approaches. I'm going to develop this and deploy this, and here are the risks that I'm seeing, and I'll try to mitigate as I go along or as they emerge. So it's very different approaches in terms of how you develop and deploy the systems and how you govern them. However, risk-based approaches also provide more practical solutions to companies as well as regulators. So we see a lot of convergence between EU AI Act, NIST, risk framework, work of Trade and Technology Council in terms of convergence, OECD, etc. So giving that flexibility, I think, as we're just starting to regulate this, it's a acceptable start, but we still need to make sure that while we're doing that, human rights are not undermined, and that's where the red lines, the bans, the prohibitions come in. You need to have that as the EU AI Act. We can again we think at least at CIIDP that the red lines should be more expensive in the EU AI Act, that there are still systems like biometric categorization or predictive policing and facial recognition or biometric recognition for mass surveillance or biometric categorization. Such systems should also be prohibited. Not all of them are prohibited yet. So you establish those prohibitions first. The total no. We're not developing or deploying the systems in EU or in the US. There's a no. And then for everything else, here's the risk-based approach. That's where we're right now, but getting that balance is also very tricky, and what the EU policymakers and legislators have been discussing in the last 2 years now.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering your questions. And we were just wondering, to close out, would you be willing to offer any words of advice for young people?
First, I'm going to do a plug for Center for AI and Digital Policy, especially if you're a law student. We do have 2 possible options for law students. One is our main semester-long AI policy clinics, and we have researchers, civil society advocates, policymakers in their respective governments from 60-something countries coming in for a semester getting training on AI policy. So applications open for that if for those interested for the full semester. Second is especially for law students, we have externship programs that runs kind of in parallel, as well as summer, where you get credit for the work that you do, AI policy work that you do in your law school. So we're trying to also expand the literacy in the law school context as well. These technologies are not going anywhere, and I think it's really interesting to be at the intersection of like legal professions and technology right now, because there is going to be, I feel like there's going to be a floodgate of cases and case law coming our way. And one of the things that keeps me up at night, coming back to your question, Adam, is what happens when a case comes to the court and the judge either doesn't have enough expertise to judge the right way and makes a decision nevertheless, and that sets precedent. And second, what if a case comes to in front of a judge and the judge makes a political decision and sets a precedent? Those precedents will, as they do, will define what happens with other business models, other applications, etc. So definitely for students in the field, whether you're looking to become a lawyer, prosecutor, attorney at large, or a judge, anywhere in the profession or in the field, there's going to be more and more need for a better understanding of these technologies.
Thank you so much, Merve. This has been great. Really, I mean, I've learned so much. I hope all of our fellow law students listening to this, even though we're coming to the age of Chevron, end of Chevron. There's certainly a lot up in the air when it comes to AI. So thank you, Merve, so much for the time. And we hope to reconnect soon, but looking forward to your future releases.
Thanks for having me. Great questions. And I really enjoyed the questions myself, and hope to keep in touch with all of you.
All right.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.